Greetings, humans. Welcome back to the Black Pill. I've been avoiding this for a long time. There's no avoiding it anymore. Let's talk abortion politics. My channel's not monetized. If it were, this video would probably be instantly demonetized. Content warning: Nazis, fascist, significant use of trigger words associated with abortion politics. You know what they are. Ugh, I'm pretty lefty. Look, man, I'm a scientist, and the science, especially the social scientist, has, as Stephen Colbert notes, a well-known liberal bias. It's not that I love Democrats; it's that Democrats increasingly follow the science, and conservatives increasingly, by definition, see the abortive series that I started on understanding fascism don't. So people who oppose the practice of abortion are too easy to caricature. I'm not really here to do that, and they're probably not completely wrong about everything. A society that does not protect its weakest, most vulnerable people, members, is probably not a very good society. Um, I advocate every day for more protections and equal rights for vulnerable minorities. And the more vulnerable the minority, the more protections that they have. And where we hang up is this problem of absolutism, right? The idea that at the moment of conception, what we have is a person, a complete person with no gradation. We'll loop back around there later on. The most fervent anti-abortion people tend to A, oversimplify the issue, and B, operate in this wild opposite world of dis and misinformation and alternative facts, and only charts and data that support the particular claims that would justify voting for fascists, essentially. As an example, let's do a quick pre-quiz. First, what do you think is happening around marriage and especially divorce in the United States in what year is it now? 2022. Is divorce increasing, decreasing, or staying the same? Since 1980, let's say, has divorce increased, decreased, or stayed the same? Take a minute. Man, write down an answer, make a commitment. Well, here's a nice chart. Probably here. I'm going to put a chart here. Here's a nice chart, and you'll see that there's a steady drop off in divorce since 1980. This particular chart is divorce per 1,000 people. That's really what you want, the rate. The rate per, what I'm going to refer to as a ratio. Not the absolute number, but the number per 1,000 people. So about half of divorces have ended, about half of marriages have ended in divorce since about 1980. We have fewer divorces because fewer people marry. Have you heard something different? You heard something different from that? Right? So the divorce rate has gone, the divorce actual number has declined, and the number per 1,000 people has stayed about the same. Okay, since 1980. Have you heard something different from that? Have you heard about some kind of crisis in marriage that only conservative Christianity can fix? Huh? If so, just take a moment, turn off this video, take a moment, and check your immediate environment for fascists. Specifically, your social media environment. You're probably getting a lot of dis and misinformation through conservative channels on your social media. All right? Next, what's happening in the realm of abortion in the United States? Are we having more, fewer, or the same number of abortions as always in the United States? Again, take a second, make a commitment. I'll wait, or just pause the video. Mm-hmm. Well, again, steady decline. The rate appeared to shoot up. The number of reported abortions shot up. In 1973, which is the year of Roe versus Wade, when it became legal in the United States to have abortions. Um, that isn't the actual rate, that's the reported rate. And of course, there were abortions happening all the time that were unreported because they were illegal. Stash that for later. It's really important. Nobody was reporting illegal abortions. I mean, for obvious reasons. And the rate has been on a steady decline since 1990. There is a little uptick in the last 3 years, and that's probably related to COVID, Trumpism, and economic worries. That is, people who can afford children don't want to bring children into a Trumpy world where we don't know if we're going to be a society in the next 5 or 10 years. What kind of world are they going to grow up in? People with climate worries don't want to bring more children into the world where we increasingly don't have the resources to keep humanity and especially Americans in the manner to which they've become accustomed. And then poor people, economically devastated, who could not just WebEx in to their work during COVID, just can't afford to have children. And so there's a small, I mean, really just a little tiny uptick, not a spike, but a small uptick in abortions over the last couple, 3 years. If you think abortions are a problem that's worse every year, and if you think teenage pregnancy is a problem, and it's a problem that's worse every year, and teenagers have lost their moral compass and are like rabbits and making babies and whatever, I mean, again, right? Charts. This is Goodmacher. Goodmacher is like the premier source, the best researcher and purveyor of this kind of statistical information, widely respected, and of course, therefore hated in opposite land, but widely respected. If you think the opposite of what this chart says, I mean, again, just check your immediate environment for fascists. So this is the absolute number, and then this here is going to be is going to account for population growth. So again, not the absolute number, but the rate per thousand individuals. Next, good. There isn't a real abortion problem here, all right? The numbers are coming down. They're coming down through liberal means. And conservatives would really need authoritarians would really need that to be false in order for you to keep voting for authoritarian means, and hence all the lying, and hence why straw polling in my classrooms, young people who should know better, 60% of them think that divorce is severe and rising, and teen pregnancy is a huge problem, and whatever. Those are just lies. The numbers are coming down, and they're coming down through liberal means. And for our purposes, liberal means granting the widest possible freedom, the most equal rights, the most protection under the law for all kinds and categories of people, and also the best possible information and education so people can make the best decisions for themselves. That's liberalism. When women have sex education and self-esteem, and couples have good access to prophylaxis, and the economy is good, people want to have about 2 children per couple and can do so without recourse to abortions. Okay? So we've been crunching the numbers on this for years. 5 years ago, it really seemed like sex ed in middle school was the factor. The less girls get abstinence-only education and get actual health science education, the more they use condoms and other means of preventing pregnancy. Um, in meta-analysis, this doesn't really hold up. Okay, it's still a talking point. It's still a talking point against abstinence only. I'll give you something else to say about abstinence only in a minute. It's not necessarily strictly and only the sex education that does the job in reducing teen pregnancy, unwanted pregnancy, and therefore abortions. It's a factor, but the causative direction is fuzzy, not all that clear. When all the possible factors go into a big statistical blender, what it seems like is that authoritarianism causes teen pregnancy and abortion. Okay? We'll get to some of the mechanics of that in a second. Teaching kids about safe sex doesn't make them more promiscuous. Come on, man, you were a teenager once, yeah? They're already promiscuous, hormones raging and whatever. But telling them not to do it with no other support is definitely unhelpful and possibly harmful. They might experience what's called reactivity. That's when someone's telling you that you must do a thing, for example, wear a mask to go out in public. Like a significant part of your brain goes, no way, Jack, right? F you, I won't do what you tell me. Even if what you're being told to do is actually the right, helpful thing to do. So if our parents tell us no when we're teenagers, we kind of go, we have to try that. It's probably fun. Teenagers were not, after all, delivered by stork or found under the mulberry bush, right? Everything in society makes wait until marriage sound like pure hypocrisy. Abstinence only programs teach girls the only value they possess is between their legs. And they have to safeguard their hymens so they can eventually move out of their father's houses into their husband's houses, as is traditional in America. So when they find themselves in this adult situation in the back of their boyfriend's car that he borrowed from dad for the night up on Lover's Lane, whatever, they lack the internal fortitude. They lack the self-valuation to say no. They think all that they have to offer this young man is their sexuality, and they have nothing else to offer, and so to keep him and to maintain, to be safe, right? This is fundamentally liberal and authoritarian approaches. In modernity, we know that those commandment style practices just are not effective. They lead to more violent societies and cause inequality, inequity. The classic problem is the dare scenario. After school, everyone goes to an assembly in the gym. There's the sheriff, who came in his Trans Am painted up in police colors so he can seem cool, right? And, God, it's the 90s. You know, very few places still do dare. Only the most backwards, rural, countrified, mandatory church meetings on Sundays places still do this, all right? And there's a prisoner with him on day release from the lockup, and he came separately because his wheelchair doesn't fit in the police interceptor, you know what I mean? And the sheriff starts in, right? Everyone's dragged into the assembly hall after school on a Friday afternoon, you know, and the sheriff starts in. Weed is a gateway drug. One puff and you're hooked and looking for something stronger. Weed leads to cocaine, leads to amphetamines. And then the prisoner chimes in. I was on a gang. I got hooked on Mary Jane. And the next thing I knew, I was selling my axe behind the 7-Eleven, stealing my mom's VCR to score a hit. Then I got stabbed in the spine in a gang hit. And you know what happens to men in prison. Stay in school, kids. This stuff is worse than ineffective. That is, drug use does not decline in youth exposed to these programs. It doesn't even stay level, it actually increases. This is called over justification. What's happened is we've given those young people external reasons not to do a behavior. But that reason is overblown, obvious bullcrap. The kids laugh at it. Not only is it unrealistic, but young people already believe that they're immortal, special individuals with special destinies. Come on, you were 17, right? They say, not just that's laughable, but that won't happen to me. And then they react, right? They're reactive, an equal opposite reaction to the program. And suddenly they're interested in drugs. See the problem? Do you see the problem? Right? So one day, church lady comes to school. She doesn't say she's church lady. She says she's with a foundation so that the school can slip her money and there's no First Amendment violation, at least not an obvious one. But the foundation is solely funded by and is an arm of the church. Dig? Okay? All the girls are invited. The boys go home or watch videos about uh, I don't even remember. Um, the boys go home. She starts with a slideshow of people who had STIs that went untreated because treatment wasn't widespread when the photos were taken. So it's photographs of vaginas that look like rotting hamburger and stuff. A real gross out show. It's awful. And then there's this discussion of STIs suggesting sex outside of marriage always results in herpes or gonorrhea, the clap and syphilis and AIDS. As if marriage is somehow a defense from infectious diseases. There might be testimony from a young woman who contracted HIV after having sex with one guy one time. And then church lady passes around the daisy, right? And every girl has to pluck a petal from the daisy. Pluck, that's not suggestive. And then eventually, when it's gone around, it's just an empty stem. And church lady's like, who wants this flower after everybody's plucked it? And then finally, the final insult, out comes this box of like 50-cent novelty rings. And the girls marry their fathers in a religious ceremony. Yeah. All the dads come out of the woodwork where they've been waiting. And there's a ceremony where the girls give the dads their rings that symbolize their virginity, and dad is to hold on to their virginity until the time that those girls get married. Do you see the problem? This is not a caricature. This is literally what these programs look like. That's literally what happens. Do you see the problem? Do you see it? There's no internal reason for that young woman. Just these unrealistic, overblown fears and authority figures standing over them. And when they're in the back of their boyfriend's borrowed Cadillac on Lover's Lane, daddy's not there standing over them to regulate their behavior. Authoritarian approaches don't work. Not for anything, not for psychological ethics, right? Not for reducing speeding, not for guns. Now a Venn diagram of people who oppose gun control and support abortion bans is like, man, it's mostly overlap, dude. On the gun side, they understand the issue. If you outlaw guns, only outlaws will have guns. Yeah? And just cannot apply the same logic because we're not doing logic. The left's hypocrisy on the gun issue, that's a problem for another day. Another like hour long video. I'm really waiting for the COVID era to settle down and produce usable numbers. But gun bans don't work, and we know that they don't work, and the data that you've seen on that issue has been carefully modified to make it appear that they work. Um, Again, I'm not really that lefty. I'm a scientist. Look, this isn't just theory, all right? The stuff about authoritarianism not working isn't just theory. It's not just nice charts and science papers. Look, fascists, Derek, we did it your way once already. I'm talking about Romania under Ceausescu. A Putin style lying authoritarian gets it into his head that a good country is a large country, a populous country. So the more babies born, the bigger the population, the grander the nation. So he unilaterally banned abortions and birth control. And the result was a massive domestic supply of infants. A glut of babies dropped off at orphanages. If you're hearing allusions to an experiment in which babies were raised without human contact and died of neglect, that is not an ethical experiment anybody could run. That's referring to Ceausescu's Romania, when there were so many babies in orphanages, there was not the staff to care for them or available families in which to place them. And those children died of neglect, not because people weren't touching them, but because people weren't feeding them and keeping them clean. And also a corresponding spike in dead women killed in dirty backroom abortions. When people think they need a thing, they're going to get that thing by means legal or illegal. For those of you not alive yet, in 1973, and I was born late that year myself, right? And unfamiliar with the legislative history, this was the problem in America that Roe versus Wade solved. Too many deaths in unsafe procedures. Roe versus Wade was judicial activism. Fact. Judicial activism to stop the underground butchery. And overturning Roe versus Wade is equally judicial activism to restart underground butchery. A broad program of education, healthcare, egalitarianism, and economic prosperity for a burgeoning middle class have done their work in a way that authoritarian practices never could. So why keep talking about it? Why constantly make this an issue? Why lie about it? Well, conservatives tend to have things in common. Again, this is based deeply on data. I didn't decide conservatives were stupid and go out and find data to support that conclusion. No, I found the data and then reached the conclusion that conservatives and liberals or progressives tend to think differently, using different parts of their brain. So, conservatives tend to be all or nothing thinkers. Issues are simple. They're right or they're wrong. Gradations, ambiguity, complexity, right? No. Those 10 commandments, or the 4 or so that are relevant in modernity. That's the law. It's that simple. And it just isn't. Things are right or they're wrong. That's it. And abortion's wrong. So it should be illegal. We can't let things be legal that are wrong. This goes right at that hypocrisy problem. Guns are right. In the conservative field, guns are right. It's right to be self-reliant and strong and aggressive towards people who threaten you or your family or deer or assailants or, I don't know, black people in a car at a gas station with their music on too loud. Look it up. From this view, an authoritarian one where people in power say what's right and wrong, there is no hypocrisy. Two, conservatives tend to be limbic thinkers. If you've been tracking the black pill, you know what that means already. And this, again, is not just an allegation or a defamatory comment. The neuroscience here is quite strong. And we can get there two ways. First, we can do things that induce limbic activation. The limbic system handles, a lot of the textbooks say emotion. You know, emotion is really a higher brain integrated thing. Primitive emotion, anger, terror, and disgust. Those all live in the limbic system, and those are all kind of one thing. Even Joe Rogan knows this. The fear factor, half of the fear inducing stimuli are like eating spiders. That's not terrifying, it's gross. Same primitive feeling. Okay? So we can induce limbic activation. We can present people with foul smells like necrotizing tissue, rot, scary scenarios, pictures of strangers, and then ask them to make political decisions. Like, should we grant asylum to asylum seekers from countries that America has messed up? You know, should we send foreign aid to countries where there's hunger? That kind of stuff. Or we can ask them to make political decisions in an MRI and see which part of their brain lights up, which is the more active part of their brain. Okay? In the first case, people exposed to upsetting, fearful, disgusting stimuli make more conservative decisions, limiting freedom, punishing offenders, punishing just strangers, denying aid to anyone they can see as an other. In the second case, people making conservative decisions show more limbic activation, right? Okay? So, debates aren't a good way to achieve truth. That's not what they're for. Debate is a rhetorical exercise. Parties trying to convince each other or an audience to take on a given position. Debates on abortion are especially problematic and show the different reasoning styles very plainly. Conservatives misuse science, to try to construe embryos as fetuses and fetuses as children. We've only even thought of babies as children and children as people in the last 100 years, right? Liberals who understand science show a gradation between most child at full term and least child at conception and maybe entering the fetal phase and not a child at all, right back here in embryonic. Liberals induce empathy for the mother and point to the social harms of abortion bans, and conservatives show images of bloody fetuses after the procedure and drive up and down the main street in your town with this big placard, you know, with bloody aborted fetuses all over it. Pictures thereof. Conservatives just lie, using any means necessary to gross out and upset the audience. Even if intellectually unconvinced by this, the audience is in limbic activation. Unpleasant topics, unpleasant pictures, probably some shouting and conflict and side taking have made actual reasoning harder. The limbic system's active, the frontal lobe is either doing nothing or rationalizing whatever it is the limbic system wants in that moment. And thus the whole group is more likely to make conservative decisions regardless of what they think are their political positions. Listen to the language. Republicans in particular always want us talking about rape and incest in the same breath as abortion. Bringing up abortion all the time gets us talking about rape and incest and life of the mother and so on. They a total ban appeals to absolutists, right? And also forces centrists to keep bringing up exceptions for rape and incest. They talk about rape as an unfortunate event, but the baby as an innocent victim, a silver lining, even a blessing. Rape is a blessing. Think about that. Motivation matters. Motivation matters. The conventional wisdom is Democrats vote in presidential elections, if they vote at all, because they trust the system and don't think they have to do anything to keep the system rolling. Republicans don't neglect the midterms. Republicans have reshaped the state map by going big on local and state off-year elections, really allowing them to gerrymander states, getting easy majorities in the National Congress. One method of doing this has been anti-abortion activism, which keeps a minority highly activated, angry, and voting. The fewer people vote, the more Republicans win, which is why they're so upset about mail-in ballots during COVID. 2020 was the freest, fairest election in American history. We've never had a free and fair election. Remember, in the beginning, only landed, propertied white men were permitted to vote. And it wasn't until 1920 that women had the right to vote. Black men got the right to vote at the end of the Civil War, but that was only started to be enforced. It ran for a few years, and then we lynched everyone who voted. And then enforcement actually started in 65, 67. We've never had a free and fair election. 2020 was the freest, fairest election ever because of so many mail-in ballots. The more participation we have, the freer and fairer that election is. That's just math. The wisdom may be changing. The pundits on TV are referring to Republicans generally and the fasci Supreme Court specifically as the dog that caught the car, right? They've been barking for years, chasing this car, which is one more Supreme Court appointment, and we can overturn Roe versus Wade. They did that. And now the dog has caught the car and doesn't know what to do with the car or what to do next. And there are consequences here for success. The recent Supreme Court decision to do away with precedent entirely and toss out any decision they don't like for purely partisan political reasons, to toss out Roe versus Wade after 50 years, a shocking abuse of power for which there seems to be no recourse, has motivated the liberal Democratic base as not seen, at least in decades. Republicans have been on track to retake the House of Representatives and contest the Senate this fall. Now the Senate increasingly looks like it's secure for Democrats. They'll get maybe 52 or 53 seats. And the House now is a toss-up. Today, as I'm recording this, Team Blue enjoys a 7-point lead in generic ballots. Okay. Will they turn out in the midterm in ways that reflect the anger about this? Time will tell. There's a bigger issue. It's a moral issue, certainly. Again, Abortions are probably at least a little bit immoral in most cases. Like, we never choose between things that are bad or icky in our lives. Life is on the line here. Sure, I get it. But climate change is a population issue. Population is expected to top out, global population is expected to top out just under 10 billion. Measures to introduce sex ed, liberal economies, and birth control have resulted in a nearly worldwide decline in human fecundity. A few countries are not yet all the way over the demographic cliff. Those that have gone over that cliff find families are smaller, thus easier to feed, resulting in surpluses rather than famine. And those surpluses can be turned into cash, and cash can go to banks that can leverage that cash up to 20 times the amount of the money that they have and build roads and schools and universities and infrastructure. We cannot sustain the human population on Earth now. With Western countries, the worst overusers of energy and natural resources, deep decarbonization, and also deep population reduction are needed for us to survive as a species. Deer can't do that. Deer can't choose reproductive strategies. They can't choose to limit their population. And so they have boom and bust. They have a glut, they strip an environment of its resources, and then they starve to death. We can choose that. War is far too dirty a game. Limiting reproduction is the answer, the most ethical, most moral answer in a field of maybe not great choices. We can do that ourselves, picking the least evil that we can at every turn. Or else we can suffer global catastrophe. We are in the beginning of that global catastrophe now. Next. Women are in charge of their own reproduction. Right now, women are in charge, to a greater degree than in all of human history, of their own reproduction. Now, conservatives want to maintain existing social orders. Anti-abortion advocates are not conservatives. They are reactionaries. Reactionaries want to return to previous social orders, reducing rights for minority groups. Anti-abortion politics is, in part, reactionary. So 59% of women getting abortions already have one or more children, right? In the debate field, this is usually construed as choose to be a mother. You know, we'll support you, young teenage vagabond. That's usually not how it is. Yeah? The person making this choice is often like a married 35-year-old with 3 kids she already can't afford. The decision is usually less about whether to become a mother and whether one has the material, emotional, and social resources to add another child to the workload. Childcare is over $10,000 per year per child already. That's the average. It's substantially more for infants. Now, a small uptick in abortion rates in the past 3 years, again, probably reflects the pandemic economy. We're in this economic transition. To what? To what state of affairs? I don't know. We'll find out much later. You know, history will tell us that in the future. But people just don't want to have children in this state of uncertainty or state of poverty. Okay? The safest means of birth control is condoms backed by abortions when condoms fail. The most effective is probably hormone management, the pill. Advances in birth control have literally set women free in America. Women can stay in school, not only to complete high school, but college, to qualify for advanced degrees, to begin careers, have their own independent incomes. Look at this chart from this one's Pew Research. You see dropout rates down across the board. And this has much to do with reproductive freedom. Young women, and yes, men, lose their futures when saddled with children at a young age. We're better off when we can choose when to become parents, when we're ready, when we're financially and emotionally ready. Babies push couples into more traditional gender roles. I'm not going to say that's the point, but it is a thing that the people who advocate for total abortion bans like. Women stay home and care for babies. In a traditional household, women stay home and do all the childcare. Even in relatively egalitarian households, what happens is, you economic realities intrude. Women, white women, make 78 to 81 cents on the dollar compared to men for equal work, and for women of color, those numbers are even starker. Uh, what is it, like 70 some cents on the dollar for black women and 60 some cents on the dollar for Hispanic women? Uh, the undocumented immigrant problem is that people end up working for less because it's what they can get without paperwork. Um, and so, if both parents are around and childcare is so expensive, we have to choose who's going to stay home and manage babies. We tend to sacrifice the woman's paycheck. The woman's paycheck is lower. I know a single dad. Damn it, Derek. I know you know a single dad, but that's anecdotal evidence. Remember that anecdotal evidence is not evidence. It doesn't refute stats. There are single dads, but the vast majority of single parents are moms. So everyone should just refrain. Yeah, okay, look. Again, to repeat, pushing abstinence definitely isn't helpful and is probably harmful. In a sexist society, women are pressured into sex. Blaming individual women for engaging in sex isn't helpful and is probably harmful. Individual responsibility is a scam. Uh, God, that's another video that I haven't written yet. Young women refrain from sex or use safe sex practices statistically when they're educated, when they're otherwise occupied, when their self esteem is high and they feel empowered to say no and know that they bring something to this relationship other than their virginity. Reactionaries now seek to return the country to this pre-Civil War antebellum state, undoing by turn each of these benefits. Sometimes sex is explicitly not a woman's choice. Now, the mouth breathing crowd have a hard time with society sharing responsibility for individual choices. It's black and white, it's unambiguous. You are individually responsible for all of the conditions of your life. No, it's much cloudier. Don't make me get into Bronfenbrenner. Um, but rapists are another matter entirely, aren't they? Oh, not in court. What were you wearing? How many boyfriends have you had? But intellectually, can't we all agree that women are not responsible for being raped? Total abortion bans force women to bear the children of their attackers. Now, evolutionary theory suggests the more we allow rape babies, the more rapists will permeate society. It's hard to escape the conclusion this is part of the plan. I can't read minds, though, and I'm not going to suggest that. Now, Greg Abbott, Texas governor and fascist reactionary, when asked about rape exceptions in Texas, said, "But we're going to arrest all the rapists, you know? Don't worry, honey. We're arresting all the rapists." And this is the kind of inflammatory, Trumpist, fascist, Putin-esque bullcrap that we've come to expect from our fascist overlords. It doesn't answer the question. It contains weird contradictions. Instead of arguing the issue responsibly, we have to struggle over what he could possibly have meant by such a strange statement. You can't arrest people for crimes they might commit in the future. Therefore, Greg, there will definitely be pregnancies as a consequence of rape. Moreover, Abbott's reactionary policies are conducive to rape culture. Consistently blaming the poor for poverty, immigrants for fleeing the conditions we helped create in their own countries, dismantling education, toward reforms that protect the guilty, and so on. You know, that $50 million verdict against Alex Jones will get reduced to there's a mandatory maximum cap in Texas, and so we'll end up paying about $5.5 or $6 million if it doesn't drop under that on appeal. All this stuff ensures all kinds of rape will continue unabated, and those victims will just be shamed and disappeared from society, you know, sent off to the countryside to have the baby. Rape, while all too common, God, I hate that I have to keep saying that word. Rape, while all too common, is also the extreme end of this spectrum. Yeah. There's violent stranger rape, which is the least common, like acquaintance rape, date rape if you like, being probably the most common of the violent practices, and then the roofie, non-consensual sex kind of stuff where people are drunk or half asleep and can't do the consent thing, down to marital rape and dubious age check stuff, you know. It's all rape. It all is. But women also kind of stumble into abusive relationships, and they might want to leave that relationship but become pregnant. And a pregnancy in a society where women tend to be poorer than men, and single mothers tend to live in poverty because of the cost of childcare, they become tied to, entangled with that father, you know, in ways that prevent them ever getting completely free of their abusers. So there's all that messy stuff. It's not the child's fault. Well, rights. Forcing women to carry to term every child that is conceived creates a number of legal weirdnesses. Oh God, I didn't even script the thing about DNCs after miscarriages, and investigating miscarriages as possible murder, and investigating doctors as enablers of murder when they'd help a woman who's had a miscarriage. Oh my God. Philosophy Tube has this wonderful scenario. I encourage you to watch this sort of theatrical production of the issue of body autonomy. It really is worth the time. It contemplates whether any person can be forced to maintain the life of another person, even granting that a fetus or an embryo is a person, which is highly contestable. That aside, a consistent libertarian comes down on the side of abortions are unpleasant, but probably a social necessity. Let's make them, what is it, safe, legal, and rare, like that. My state, where I live, used to have a personhood amendment on the ballot like every time there's an election, mostly to drive up Republican turnout, to get the crazy people, the tinfoil hat people out. Defining embryos as people, that would make abortion murder, but it would also fork up the entirety of property law. If a woman did something risky without knowing she was pregnant and lost the pregnancy, she'd be guilty of manslaughter. You know, women could never consume alcohol because the risk of alcohol to the unborn without knowing about it. And man, the well here is so deep. I'm just dipping a toe in there. Ask some lawyers about this crap. Remember your Dunning-Kruger effect. I'm on the border of a bunch of stuff that I could be tempted to think I know about because I don't know about it. But I know how much I don't know, and it's a lot. I just know when this amendment comes up, the lawyers start to itch. It is a bad idea. And so far, right, the actual civil rights voters have come out in droves. It's driven up Democratic turnout to oppose the insanity of this stuff so far. But also custody? A rapist or an abusive baby daddy starts to get control of the woman. The woman becomes a host for a person, which is this other person's person. Can people on people? Oh my god. She has to raise her baby properly or he can sue. He gets visitation rights over his rape baby. So he's always there in her life, if not in always direct contact. In sex offender treatment, purveyor thereof, the first rule is to always keep the perps separate from the victims. And forced birth does the opposite. Who has the rights to a woman's body? A clump of cells? A man? A rapist? Society? Let's talk adoption. Oh, in 2008, the CDC, referring to a 2002 adoption study, used the words a domestic supply of infants. And that got misattributed in the kerfuffle over the leaking of the Supreme Court draft opinion that recently blew up Roe versus Wade. That's where it comes from, domestic supply of infants. Amy Coney Barrett did not herself, she might have endorsed it, but did not herself like utter or write those words. It's true. It's a fact that fewer women today surrender children for adoption than in the past. Like the highest number I've seen is about 9% in the 70s or something, and about 1% in modernity. And that is that is good. That is unequivocally good. Birth control, including abortion at the extreme end, means family planning is possible. And so we have fewer unwanted children. Conservatives are often quick to state that women with unwanted children can just surrender them. There's a toll on the body. Sapping nutrients, sapping calcium from the bones, that isn't undone by giving up that child to the care of other people. There's a toll on the psyche, as well as possible ongoing trauma. You know, when we're talking about rape babies, which I don't want to do, but here we are. The gestating infant of a rapist or abuser can be an ongoing daily injury, a re traumatization inflicted by this rapist or this abuser or the society forcing this to happen. More than half of infants available for adoption are adopted within the first month. Cool. Like 61%. Every month thereafter, the numbers drop. And older children who need homes tend to bounce around the foster system. More babies means fewer homes. For older children, even older infants in bad situations or with special needs. But consider this dynamic because it's very revealing. In a capitalist society, workers labor to produce goods and services. And the sale of said goods and services results in profit, in which labor do not share, right? Back in the day when I was in space ops for the Air Force, the contract rate for a contractor was like, God, back then it was about $20 an hour. And the contractor earned like 8 of those dollars, you know? And the agency got like 40% of the money for that contract. Labor in this dynamic is a cost to be reduced to the extent possible. The idea of forcing poor people to bear children so that the wealthy people, like people who can qualify to adopt and pay the fees, can have children is grotesque. This is human slavery. This is a human livestock operation. And it's pure barfomania. Fewer children available for adoption is a good thing. People trying to adopt might think otherwise, in which case they are selfish. Imagine wishing for maternal mortality, poverty, or rape babies, or unwanted teenage pregnancies stemming from a lack of self-esteem or education, so that you individually can have the baby you always wanted. Sick. Let's talk about race. I don't want to talk about race. Let's talk about race. Right-wing reactionaries like to throw out numbers to make abortion seem racist. 55 million abortions a year, the majority in the so-called third world countries where black people live. The 54, is it, or so, nations of Africa? Meaning over time, hundreds of millions of black people who don't exist, who might have existed. Okay? And they construe this as a genocide. Birth control and the possibility of family planning create economic surpluses. We've covered this. The only reason to oppose hormone management, condoms, and abortions in Africa is to maintain poverty in many of the 54 or so diverse African nations. In nature, there are essentially two strategies for reproduction. One, lay as many eggs as possible and walk away, or slither or swim away, whatever. Or have few offspring but nurture them carefully to adulthood. In the famine conditions induced by Western exploitation, more children means more resource depletion and starvation. In America, economic parity relies on abortion. People of color are most likely to be undereducated because of a segregated school system. We've made progress, yes, which Republicans work every day to undermine and dismantle, making matters ever worse. A general miasma of racism has tended to induce low self esteem in minority American citizens. See, for example, ongoing reproductions of Canon Mamie Clark's doll test. High school graduation and college attendance have lagged behind in Black communities. Much of the improvement over time, refer back to that chart in high school graduations, much of that improvement is due to ongoing civil rights work, liberalism, including access to reproductive education, access to health care, total abortion bans, like most bans written by white American politicians, affect Black citizens first and worst. More likely to be impoverished to begin with because of the historical legacy of slavery, Black families benefit from family planning. Obviously, contraception would be preferable to abortion, but the Ceausescu set, the extremists opposing the total bans, also want to ban everything: the education, the healthcare, the hormone regulation. They'd ban rubbers if they could. Look, man, I don't read minds. I just read data. Conservatives have access to all these facts. Conservative leaders, in particular, must at least be aware of the resources and hear these arguments in political session. They ignore the facts and promote the lies to stay in power. It's hard to escape a conclusion, a mind reading exercise about what these people, the Greg Abbotts of the world, really want. That desire seems to be the Federalist Society dream of a nation reduced to its antebellum years when the United States literally meant states united under one broad government, a group of sovereign, independent nations, each with its own laws inviolable by the federal government. In that environment, the civil rights of citizens depended on the opinions of the elite governing classes, virtually all landed white men. Women, Black people, and immigrants essentially had no enforceable rights. Slavery and indenture, virtual slavery, were the law of the land. Banning abortions results in higher maternal mortality, more unwanted children, more economic disparity, more traditional and therefore less egalitarian gender roles, more racial disparity, continuing ongoing poverty, more desperation, and therefore people willing to work for less, and therefore lower wages, more profits for corporations. The Supreme Court decision to toss out Roe versus Wade and throw this back to the states explicitly says states are democracies that can decide, but they are not. They're gerrymandered often beyond any possibility of democracy. Are we going to continue to allow a small, vocal, enthusiastic minority to erode democracy, achieving minority rule, the tyranny that our founders wrote the Constitution to defend us against? Abortions are probably usually immoral. They're always icky. Come on, almost nobody. I had a girlfriend in college. Almost nobody is literally pro-abortion. But lots of things are evil. A lot of things are viscerally upsetting and aren't political footballs in this way. The death penalty, tobacco companies addicting children in poor countries where the nations are so poor they can't fight the tobacco companies in international court. And population control is essential to our global survival as a species. It's necessary for gender and race equity. I don't have all the answers, but the data are suggestive. To sincerely reduce abortions, if we actually don't like abortions, we start by reducing unwanted pregnancy through education, through sex education, through egalitarian practices that raise women's self esteem and independence, access to appropriate healthcare and prophylaxis, and programs targeted at teaching young men consent and responsibility. Then make it more likely for families to choose to keep accidental pregnancies, make room in their hearts by raising our general standard of living so another child is not an economic setback or disaster for a struggling family. In other words, liberalism reduces abortions and authoritarianism increases them and profits politically by blaming the victims. This has been like an hour and 5 minutes of the Black Pill. And thanks for enduring through this. There we go. Okay, bye.